Thank you so much for being here this evening. We greatly appreciate it. You can also tell your friends we are going to record this, and this information will be available for the next 30 days on our website. So we so appreciate you being here. This is our third evening of a parent series, trying to get information out to our parents and our community stakeholders. So vaping is a hot topic and unfortunately something that we are experiencing in our schools. We are not alone. There's a huge increase across the United States with vaping. So we wanted to share information with our community partners and parents to share the dangers, what to look out for. And we have partnered with PreventEd. The mission of PreventEd is to reduce or prevent the harms of alcohol and other drug use through education, intervention, and advocacy. Tonight, you will hear from Jaden Adams, and Jaden is the community coordinator with PreventEd. So without further ado, please help me welcome Ms. Adams.
Hello. Can you all hear me well enough without the microphone? Okay. If I need to use it, I will. I'm just used to speaking to students, and so I talk loud anyway, so I didn't want to yell at you all. My name is Jaden Adams. I'm with PreventEd. So I'm a community coordinator. I do a lot of different things, actually. So the majority of my time I spend in schools. So we work with about 5th to 12th grade about actual substance use education, and then I'll also go into kindergarten through 4th, and we talk about character development and being a good person, making friends, and things like that. So that's kind of what I do at PreventEd. We have a lot of different departments. We have information out there that you can grab after this as well. And then we also have Marilyn Carter here as well. Do you want to introduce yourself really quick?
Yes, I'm Marilyn Carter. I'm the Community Coalition Coordinator for DART. And for those of you who may not know what DART is a local coalition here in Lincoln County, and our main mission is to educate and prevent youth substance use in our community. We have had a mega grant recently, and we have focused on vaping. So we have put out there, a lot of people did not know that the law changed from 18 to 21. So we've been working on putting that out there, having billboards, letting the community know that. We've been working with the police department to do the compliance checks. Fortunately, Troy adopted our 21 ordinance, but not all of our counties around us have. So it's a little bit hard to enforce the T21 when our community has not completely adopted that ordinance. So those are some of the things that we are currently working on. I also have a lot of information out on the table for you.
Yes. Yeah, Marilyn's contracted with PreventEd, so we work very closely together. So, so I do, like I said, I do mostly teaching in schools. Another part that kind of gives me some good insight into sharing this information, I also do substance use counseling. So if students get in trouble at school for vaping or drinking or smoking cannabis, anything like that, they can be referred to us. And we have a guided program that works with students that are they don't necessarily need treatment, but they need some additional education and support. So I work closely with them as well, and I hear new information from them all the time as well. Vaping is very new, so we'll talk about kind of how new it is. So honestly, there might be some information that I don't have, so if you have questions, I will be totally honest if I don't have the answer, because I might not know. So I just want to throw that out there as well. Thank you again. I'll echo Dr. Salvo for coming tonight. It is hard to get people involved and interested, but this is super important because this is being seen more and more. So thank you again. Do you all feel like vaping is an issue here in Lincoln County?
Yes.
Absolutely, yes. And it is an issue everywhere. So I work all in the St. Louis County regions, everywhere. It's an issue everywhere. So, and same thing when I go into schools, students will agree that it's a huge issue. So this kind of gives us national numbers, and I will tell you, this PowerPoint is typically the PowerPoint I will use when I go into high schools and talk about vaping. I did tailor it a little bit to adults, of course, but bear with me if there's a couple true-false questions in there. Just humor me and answer true-false. That would be awesome. But I have this national data. There's also some local data. So Lincoln County is on the left here, that first column. This is based on the Missouri Student Survey that's given out every 2 years. A couple things, if we compare this to the Missouri data, there's a couple things that are a little bit higher for Lincoln County. So used electronic cigarettes. The other one, the perception of peers would think you're cool or very cool if you use it. There's about a 10% increase there as well. The only thing, there was something I wanted to point out on here. Oh, one of them. So if we look at cigarettes compared to electronic cigarettes, it seems that the cigarette numbers are really low. And that's just because we've had that drilled in our heads at such a young age that we see it all over, there's advertisements and things like that that are talking about how dangerous smoking is. But clearly students don't have the same idea about vaping. So it's very different. So we'll go into kind of the educational piece of this. This is what I would share with students. So first thing we always talk about is just what are these devices? So these are I always compare this to the iPhone. So like the iPhone 1 of vapes would be that first generation that actually looks like a regular cigarette. You don't see kids using those anymore because they look like cigarettes. They want to be more sneaky about it. But all of these devices have some sort of battery. They have some sort of e-liquid or vape juice. So either that's already in the device or it's something that's added to it. And then they all have some sort of heating element that heats up that liquid. And so these are some older vaping devices. And then in 2015, of course, Juul came out. And really, Juul didn't get super popular until about 2018. That's kind of when we saw the big spike in teens starting to vape. And why do you all think Juul was so popular when it came out? Anybody want to comment on that?
Discreet.
Yes, it's super discreet. We talked a little bit at a meeting earlier about in the past when parents would find these, a lot of times they wouldn't know what they were. It looks like a flash drive. I've also had students tell me it looks like the container that you put lead in for a mechanical pencil, and I totally agree, it looks like that as well. So in the past, if these were found in a kid's bedroom, a parent might not think anything of it, or they might think they're literally working on schoolwork. And I talked to students about how the CEO of Juul made it look like that for a reason. He wanted it to be easy for them to hide. And you can see it can be put in the palm of their hand. The CEO of Juul, he basically got fired. He had to step down from his position because he got so many lawsuits for targeting kids. And one way, of course, was the device itself and what that looked like. Secondly, all the different flavors. Mango was the most popular flavor among youth. But since they've banned all the flavors, now they can only purchase menthol and tobacco flavors, which that makes sense because they were made to get people to quit smoking. So of course those flavors attract adults that used to smoke. Students that were juuling, they weren't using them to help them quit smoking cigarettes, right? They were just using them for the flavor. So they got rid of all those flavor. The CEO of Juul maintained all along, he said, we only advertise to adults that used to smoke cigarettes. But if you look at this girl, does she look like an adult that used to smoke cigarettes? Clearly not. And I always ask students, like, how old do you think she is? And they always say maybe 16, 17, 18. I don't know how old she is, but she's clearly not an adult. So that was one of the first advertisements that got taken down really quickly. And then have you all heard of different brands that are even more popular today? Yes, Escobar, Elf Bar, yes. Those are the two that I've seen most commonly. Are there any others that you've heard of recently?
Mike Tyson has one now.
Mike Tyson? Interesting. I haven't even heard of that one, so I need to look that one up. Okay. I've heard a little bit about Views, but that kind of seems a little older school. But it seems like Escobar, which is the one in the top right here, and Elf Bar are the most common ones. Puff Bar was really popular at first, but I think that kind of fizzled out quickly. I had a really interesting conversation with a student the other day. We were talking about You know, a lot of schools now will have metal detectors, and if these can be detected with metal detectors, and the students know which ones can and which ones can't based on what they're made of. So they are very smart. They know how to get past certain things. So that's one thing that they're thinking of, is they're picking their brands based off of that as well. So it's really, really interesting. But these are most common just because you can still buy all the flavors. So when Juul got in trouble for all the flavors, they only banned flavors that are sold in cartridges, like the little Juul pods. The ones that already come with the flavoring in it, they can still sell them, which doesn't make any sense, but it's just kind of a loophole in the system. They could get banned after a while, but that's probably going to take quite a bit of time. These are also really popular because they're disposable, which we'll talk about that later. But basically students say, well, you can just use them and hide the evidence. So again, just another way that the companies are thinking about what youth are attracted to and what would make them buy them. And so I think that has a lot to do with it as well. And if at any point you have any questions, feel free to raise your hand. There's also going to be time at the end if you have questions too. All right, this is where you have to humor me. Vaping devices produce water vapor. Is that true or false? False. This is a common myth, and this is what I hear from students all the time, that it's just water vapor that comes out. But of course, there's all of those chemicals in there. And so I won't show this video, I'll just kind of talk about it. But basically it talks about how water vapor would just be like, think of steam when you're boiling water for pasta or whatever. That steam that comes off is water vapor. There's just water in there. But there's a ton of chemicals in that vape juice. So when they're exhaling that, it's not like those chemicals disappear. So that aerosol has a bunch of chemicals in it. So it's not just water vapor. There is no requirement that the ingredients be listed on vape product packages. True or false?
True.
This is true, yes. And this is because vapes are not currently FDA approved. So when something, I always explain to the students that when something is FDA approved, it doesn't necessarily mean that it's safe to use. So cigarettes are FDA approved. Obviously we know those are not safe to use, but that means that we know everything that's in it. So we know there are 7,000 chemicals in cigarettes, and we know all of those chemicals. Whereas with vaping devices, unfortunately, they don't have to provide a document that has all of those chemicals in there, so they can really put whatever they want in there, and they don't have to prove that it's safe for human consumption. So we'll talk about how that can be a little bit sneaky here in just a little bit, but they've tested, of course, those vape juices, and these are a few of the chemicals that have been found in there. And something that the vaping companies like to say is that vapes are safer because there's fewer chemicals than cigarettes. That means there's fewer than 7,000 chemicals. That doesn't really say much. So these have been found to be in there. Some chemicals are okay to vape because they're also used in food products. False. So this again is kind of a way that the companies will try to justify what we're putting in our bodies. So they'll say, you know, that chemical's totally safe to vape because we use that same chemical in different food products. So I will there's a doctor that talks on this. He talks on it very well. So I am going to play this video, and I'll give you another example after this.
So the flavors they're absolutely, they're chemicals, and they're well-defined chemicals. They're often the same chemicals that you will have in food flavorings. And in food, they're very safe because you take them in a different way. You eat them, and the body has a mechanism for making these compounds less toxic, so through the liver. And so like cinnamon flavorings, and people can eat lots of cinnamon, and there's obviously no ill effects. But inhaling cinnamon is a very different kind of way to expose yourself. So then that goes directly to the lungs and then directly to the bloodstream from the lungs. And so it hasn't had a chance for the body to make it a less toxic compound. And so in fact, so inhaling cinnamon flavor can cause very serious harm.
Right. So he explains that eating cinnamon and inhaling it is two totally different things. This is kind of a hard concept at first for students to understand. Usually I'll say, why does this not make sense for the companies to say, well, it's totally safe to vape because you already eat that chemical. And a lot of times it's hard for them to understand, but then I'll give them an example of, let's say for strawberry flavoring, they'll say that they use the same chemical to make strawberry vape juice that they use to make strawberry jello. And then somebody will be like, well, we don't vape jello. And they're right. When we eat it, it goes to our stomach, and our stomach has different enzymes and chemicals that can break that down. Our lungs don't. Our lungs aren't meant to have anything but oxygen in them. So they don't have that same power to break chemicals down. And he talked about cinnamon, which is a good example. Another good example is diacetyl. Have you all heard of that? Okay. Diacetyl is a chemical that's directly linked to causing popcorn lung. And popcorn lung, the reason it actually got that name is surprisingly from a popcorn factory. So diacetyl is in like the buttery flavor of popcorn. And so they found that people who were working in this popcorn factory for 40 and 50 hours a week, they were coming down with this weird lung infection, and they related it back to breathing in diacetyl, which we can eat buttered flavored popcorn and not get popcorn lung. But if you're working at a factory and you're breathing that in all day, that's going to damage your lungs. And that diacetyl is found in most vape juices that have kind of that buttery sweet flavoring. So that's why so many kids are getting sick from this, is because they're breathing in a chemical that directly causes a lung infection like popcorn lung. All right, most e-cigarettes or other vaping devices don't contain nicotine. This should be easy. False, yes. And this is something that I'm learning that even a lot of adults aren't necessarily aware of. When I say that vapes aren't FDA approved, nicotine is one of those things they can kind of sneakily put in there. So if you see something advertised as being nicotine-free, that does not mean 0% nicotine. So what they can do is they can put trace amounts of nicotine in there and pass it off as being nicotine-free because they're not regulated by the FDA, so they don't have to be honest about that little bit that's in there. And honestly, for an adult, 0.03% is not going to do anything. But for a teenager, that small amount is enough to get them addicted without them even knowing it. So it's sad because if you think of a teenager who's trying to make a safer choice by using a nicotine-free vape, they can still get addicted without even knowing it because their brain is still developing. And so that's something we always go back to, is the fact that their brain is still developing, and it takes a tiny amount of something and it can happen very quickly for them to get addicted to it. So I always explain it as, your brain, when you're younger, your brain catches on to stuff really, really quick, which is why they say to teach 3-year-olds a foreign language, because they learn it better. But unfortunately, your brain is primed the same way for addiction. So it's a lot easier to get addicted to something when you're younger than if you're an adult that starts using them. And the companies know that too. So how much nicotine is in there? This is something I used to see all the time when I go into schools, is that 1 Juul pod is equal to an entire pack of cigarettes. And that is true for a 3% Juul pod. A lot of students who I've been meeting with are using 5% Juul pods, or of course these other brands. So if they're using that 5% and they're going through, let's say, a Juul pod a day, that's equal to a pack and a half of cigarettes a day. So it's a lot more than we originally thought. So this is something I've really been sharing with them too. It's just because we always think of that fact on the top of our head. A Juul pod is equal to a pack of cigarettes. It's actually equal to more. So I've had students ask me, how hard would it be for somebody to quit vaping? And I say, you know, if they're going through a Juul pod a day, it's going to be just as hard as somebody who smokes a pack and a half of cigarettes a day, which is not easy for anybody who's tried to quit. The one thing I always point out on this slide is I talk about their heart. So nicotine's a stimulant, which means it speeds your body up, which also means it speeds up your heart rate. And so even if somebody can't feel it, when they're smoking or vaping, their heart is beating faster and harder than it normally would. And so over time, obviously your heart's a muscle, so that muscle can give out, and it can lead to heart attacks and strokes. So I think this is something that really hits home with a lot of students, especially the ones that I'm working on in one-on-one counseling. You know, a lot of times they'll tell me, I'm totally fine, like my lungs feel fine, I don't want to quit because I don't see the point in it. And it makes them feel good right now, so it might help them in the moment. But when we talk about long-term and what that does to your heart, and I tell them, you know, it significantly increases your risk of having a heart attack and a stroke at a younger age. And I think that really hits home with them, or at least I hope so. They tell me it does sometimes. So that's one thing I've really been talking to them is like, even though it makes you feel good right now, it's important to think about things long term. Young people who use e-cigarettes may be more likely to smoke cigarettes in the future. True or false? This one is true. Yes. So these are just some numbers here you see. So those that used e-cigarettes, that's that 30.7% went on to try regular cigarettes. And when I ask students, you know, what are your thoughts on this? Why do you think a teenager would go from vaping to smoking regular cigarettes? Which, by the way, is doing the opposite of what vapes were invented for. They were invented to get people to quit smoking, and now they're just causing people to start smoking. But students will say, you know, maybe it's because they just feel like their vape's not doing it for them anymore, and they want to try something different. Some of them will say that cigarettes seem like the more adult thing to do. So it's kind of like you're graduating from vapes to smoking cigarettes, which was interesting. And then a lot of them say money, because vapes are expensive, students don't have a ton of money, and it might be cheaper for them to just purchase a pack of cigarettes. So we've seen that a lot, that kids are going from using e-cigarettes to using regular cigarettes, unfortunately. All right, so you can get secondhand aerosol from being around someone who vapes. This is true. So I talk about it just like secondhand smoke. Again, when somebody exhales that aerosol, it's not like those chemicals disappear. So I talk about if they're with friends who are vaping or parents who are vaping or anybody, to treat it just like you would secondhand smoke from a regular cigarette, to try to kind of distance yourself and not breathe in those chemicals, because you're infecting your own lungs with that as well. All right. E-cigarettes have been known to explode. Yes, absolutely. I will give a quick warning. On the next slide, there is a picture of somebody who it exploded in his face. It's not very gruesome. I cannot stand blood, and it does not make me queasy at all, but I do want to point that out. And I'm going to show a video in a second, and there's 2 different pictures in that one. So that's my warning. If you want to look down, you can. But the reason that this happens is because they're electronic. So it has to do with the battery that's in the device. Batteries in vaping devices don't have overheating protection. So if you think about the battery in your cell phone, if you've ever left it in your car or outside on a really hot day, it shuts off. It doesn't explode, which is nice. So it shuts off and it tells you it has to cool down until you can turn it back on. Vaping devices don't have that. So if they overheat, they do explode. So they've exploded from people overcharging them or just using them too much. Which, if you think about it, people do use these a lot, because even adults, they can use them indoors in their own houses. They treat it differently than cigarettes, so they are using them all day long. And I used to say that this wasn't super common, that we don't hear about it a lot, but the more schools I go into, people personally know people that this has happened to. So I was at a school recently, and one student said that this happened to her dad, and it blew up in his face, and he had to get surgery, and he lost teeth. And she said he's fine now, but it was very traumatic when it happened, as I can imagine. And then the same school, a teacher's friend's son had one blow up in his pocket. And so he received third-degree burns to his leg from that. So it can blow up while they're using it in their pocket. And again, it's more common than even I thought. So that's just something added to think about, if that's a deterrent. This is one of my favorite videos, because it's very short and sweet, but it kind of shows different symptoms that you don't hear about as often and that we're just kind of learning about. And again, there's 2 different pictures that also show explosions. So I love the end because it just says why vape in the first place. But yeah, it's interesting because it said, why do vapes make my nose run? Why do they make my teeth hurt? Just different things that we don't hear about all the time. And that's because vapes are really new, and a lot of the information that we're getting is based on self-reporting. So people have been vaping for a while and they're reporting what's actually happening. So they're kind of the first round of people who are vaping, and that's how we're getting a lot of our information. So I always thought that one was really, really interesting. So usually, if I'm in a high school class, this is where I pause and I will do a timeline activity with them. And so we compare tobacco to vaping, and we talk about, I'll put dates all around the room, and they have to put different facts up there, and it's fun. But basically the whole point is to see that tobacco was around forever. It's a plant, it's been around forever, but it took a really, really long time to figure out that tobacco was dangerous. So the first known uses of it were about 100 AD. That first Surgeon General's report that came out that said smoking is linked to lung cancer came out in 1964. So between that time, we talk about how smoking was super common. A lot of people did it. You could smoke pretty much anywhere. We even talk about how doctors a lot of times would recommend smoking. Usually I'll tell them that, sometimes doctors would recommend smoking for pregnant women because they thought it would help with nausea. And then they all gasp and they're like, what? That's crazy. And it is crazy because now you would never hear a doctor say that. And of course, yes, we have more advanced research and science and technology now than we did back then. So we are starting to find stuff out quicker. But vapes have only been in the United States since 2007. So about 15, 16 years now. And they really didn't get popular until, like I said, about 2018. So even 15 and 16 years, that is not a long time when we're talking about solid research and evidence. So I'll ask students, what happens to somebody when they vape for 50 years? And they say, well, they get cancer or they die. We don't know. We'll find out. They haven't been around that long. So in 8th grade, we actually teach a lesson. It's called Don't Be a Guinea Pig, which I didn't realize how many 8th graders have never heard that phrase before. They're like, what? They've never heard that before. So I have to explain what it means, but we basically talk about people who are vaping right now are kind of like testing it out for the rest of us. They're test subjects because doctors and researchers are going to look at them down the road to see what does happen when people vape that long. So this kind of shows some of the health risks. All the bubbles around it are supposed to represent what we don't know yet, what's to come, like what we'll find out in the future. What we have seen, so the CDC did a really good job before COVID So we don't have very updated numbers on this, but you may have heard of this EVALI. It's basically just vaping related lung illnesses. And what's basically happening is that all of these chemicals in the vape juices are causing chemical burns on the inside of people's lungs. So think about a chemical burn on somebody's arm or their leg. It looks very painful. That's what's going on the inside of their lungs. So they've taken, microscopic pictures of it and everything. And then doctors actually in the St. Louis area, we received information from them. They have been seeing a ton of teenagers come in with breathing problems, which is not normal for just, a typical teenager to have breathing problems. And so they started looking into it, and they found out that it's related to vaping. And they've been having to suction fluid out of their lungs that's whatever color vape juice that they're using. So if they're vaping grape-flavored vape juice, they're pulling purple fluid out of there, which I know is gross, but that's what's happening. So not only are all those chemicals getting in your lungs, but also that liquid. So usually when I teach in middle school, I'll have a student say, well, what if I just vape water? I don't know why you would do that, but you would get water in your lungs. And on a more serious note, a lot of students have been bringing up melatonin vapes and caffeine vapes. So those are which the students that I've talked to, they said that they've heard of them, but they're not super common. It doesn't sound like a ton of them are using them, which is good. But they'll ask me, well, are those safe to use? Because there's no nicotine, and there truly isn't nicotine in those. But we talk about how it's still made up of liquid and all of those chemicals. So the exact same health effects are going to be seen. It's still injuring your lungs in the same way. So just because there's not nicotine in something, it's not safe to vape anything. So when they ask if something is safer, I always say that safer doesn't equal safe. And I've had many students give me awesome analogies about that in the past. But one student said, yeah, it would kind of be like if you had a really tall cliff and then you had a shorter cliff to jump off of, what would your safest choice be? And usually students will say, well, the shorter cliff. And we say, no, the safest choice is not to jump off of a cliff, right? That's good life advice anyway. But it seems that students view cigarettes as being way up here because we've heard about it all the time. And it's like, well, I've heard that vapes are safer. Your safest choice is not vaping anything, not putting anything in your lungs that's not supposed to be there. They also looked at COVID-19 and vaping. I won't touch on this a ton, but basically smoking anything, whether we're talking about nicotine, cannabis, anything weakens your immune system. So they saw that people who vaped or smoked anything, they were more likely to get COVID, which is not shocking whatsoever. All right, Marilyn kind of talked a little bit about this. So the legal age to purchase e-cigarettes and other vape products is not 18. It is 21 now. And, usually students will bring up to me, well, there are still places that will sell to underage kids. Like, you don't even have to be 18. We know that. And we talk about, why do you think they're doing that? And of course they say to get money. Those companies obviously want money. And we talk about the fact that even if you get it, even if you buy it from a store and they sell it to you, you're not just off the hook because the store sold it to you. If you're caught with that, then you can still get in trouble for it. So that's why we do compliance checks and things like that, just to kind of make sure that places are actually following this, because the law is 21 to buy these. Vaping companies are working to reduce teen vape use. This one, even students can catch on to this one, that this one's false. In middle school, when we first kind of introduce vaping, I'll ask them, I'll say, do the vaping companies, do they actually want teenagers to start vaping? And a lot of times they'll say, no, of course not. And I say, yes, they do. Of course they do. And we kind of talk about it, but by high school, typically they understand this. They know that vaping companies are directly targeting youth. And they know that a lot of that has to do with all of the flavors. So here are some different flavors. There's whipped cream, Lifesavers, there's all sorts of candy flavors. Apple juice, Lucky Charms. I had a kid, I think this was last year, a student said that they were at a gas station and they saw Kentucky Fried Chicken flavor. And of course, as soon as he said that in the class, everybody else in the class was like, "That sounds awesome." And I say, that's what they want you to think. That's exactly what they want to hear from you, is that you enjoy these flavors. And obviously they're trying to get kids to vape for their money. And so we talk again about how you can get addicted at an earlier age. The vaping company's ultimate goal is to get money. They understand how the brain works. They will do anything to get that. And they would rather get students addicted when they're 16 rather than when they're a 40-year-old adult, because that's more of their lifetime. They're a customer, so they're spending more money on their product. So it makes sense. Also, these packaging, that's a whole other issue to discuss, because toddlers have gotten into these. I believe there's only been one reported toddler death, but there have been many instances of toddlers going to the hospital, of course, because if they see something that looks like a juice box, they're probably going to eat it. And even veterinarians are seeing animals come in with nicotine poisoning because they get into these as well. So the packaging is a whole nother issue in and of itself. So if you know anybody that uses these, make sure they just don't leave them laying out. We look at some of the advertisements. So these are a little bit older advertisements, but of course they make it look cool, they make it look fun. We compare this to, of course, the tobacco advertising. Again, we talk about how, doctors used to recommend smoking. Now the companies are recommending vaping to be safer for you and healthier for you. All right, this is my last true or false kind of question here. E-cigarettes are to be disposed of in the garbage. True or false? False. Does anybody know how you're actually supposed to dispose of them?
The same where you place your phone battery? I don't know.
Yeah, so you actually have to take them to a hazardous waste facility. And what surprises students is you have to pay to take them there. So you have to pay $1 per vape to take them to this hazardous waste facility. And of course, I say, how many students are actually disposing of them the right way? Nobody. How many adults are actually disposing of them the right way? None of them. Maybe there are some, which is awesome. But typically people aren't actually getting rid of them the way that they're supposed to. This is how, and this is another kind of angle that we've been using. A lot of students will actually bring up the environmental effects. So if this is another way we can talk about it, so be it. So we will bring it up. So the impact that these have on the environment. Again, we're just starting to learn stuff because these are only 15 years old. But this is how they're currently being disposed of. So of course, most people are just going to throw them in the garbage. Some people are going to recycle them. I don't know about you, but I've seen a ton of them just thrown out on the sidewalk or on the side of the road. Keeping them, collecting them is another kind of big one. Apparently, TikTok has told students that you can drown your vape, and so you dip it in water, and somehow that gets rid of all the chemicals, and then you can just throw it in the trash can. That is not recommended because it can shock you because it's electronic. So it's not smart to do that. And actually what we heard the other day at a meeting is that even school staff, because a lot of students are throwing these in the toilet, and somebody has to retrieve those. And school staff are actually getting shocked from them. So it's not a good idea to try to drown them or just throw them in the toilet either. But if TikTok says it, then everybody believes it's true. So that's kind of what they're going off of right now. So we talk about, the impact it has on the environment. All of those chemicals are, of course, seeping into the ground, and it's something that we're going to see in the future, kind of what it does. And they're saying that right now it's on track to be worse than cigarette butts are. So I know in the past that was kind of the big concern, is how that was going to affect our environment. But because of all the plastic, the batteries, toxic chemicals, those kinds of things are on track to be a little bit worse even. Here are some of those local facilities that I always show students, and of course, they don't care. They don't write them down. But again, you have to pay $1 per vape to get rid of them. Okay, so this is what I kind of wanted to focus on, as like the parent portion, or caregiver, or teacher, or counselor, whatever. How can you help? So this is a slide that I definitely tailored. So at the end of a student presentation, I will say, how can I quit? So if any student would like to quit, or they have a friend who wants to quit, how do they go about doing so? The best bet is to consult their doctor. And a lot of them say, well, the doctor's going to tell my parent, you know? And so the one thing that parents can do is just to kind of be open and honest about having that conversation. A lot of them are scared of their parents finding out. And I always talk to them, I say, you know, if you go to your doctor tomorrow and you tell your doctor that you're addicted to vaping, is the doctor going to call the police and arrest you? Of course not. Your doctor is there to help you. They want to help. So it's helpful if parents are kind of on the same page and that they can kind of work with the doctor. A lot of students that I'm seeing on the counseling side of things, they are working closely with the doctor to actually make a plan and help them quit. And it's the same way that vapes were intended for in the first place. So starting with a high level of nicotine, or whatever they're using right now, which is typically a pretty high level, and then slowly kind of weaning themselves off, maybe a couple weeks at a time. If you work closely with a doctor, I've had a lot of students have a lot of success from that, which is awesome. Some doctors will recommend nicotine patches and nicotine gum. That kind of depends on the doctor, because those still should only be available to people who are 21, since they do have nicotine in them. But some doctors will absolutely recommend that as well, just as another way to get that in their body without actually vaping it. One thing I forgot to mention earlier, so I said that the vaping companies will say that vapes are safer because there's fewer chemicals. They were actually, I should have said this earlier, they were invented by a pharmacist, which seems really weird. But the pharmacist's father died of lung cancer because he smoked actual cigarettes, and the pharmacist was a smoker as well. And so he wanted to make something that was safer to use. And the reason he thought it was safer is because there's no tobacco in a vape. So they don't get any tar in their lungs. So tar comes from that burning tobacco. So that's another reason that a lot of people think that they're safer, is because there's no tar associated with them. But again, you get all those chemicals, all that vape juice in there as well. So just making a plan with a doctor is probably your best bet. But there's also these different apps and websites and things out there for students who might not be ready for that. So we leave this up at the end of our presentations just so they can jot it down if they need to. And I do see some students taking use of these, and we hand out fact sheets that also have all of this information, including those resources on there as well. So as a parent, the best thing to do is just be open, honest, understanding, and just having a conversation with them, because the students I've been working with, the ones who have that parental support, they improve drastically. And I know another issue I've been coming across is quite the opposite. So of parents who are maybe supporting vaping, that is a lot tougher of a situation. That definitely is. And I've come across that a little bit as well. And again, it's all about education, because parents, they also think it's safer, and they might not understand how unsafe it is just because they might not have this knowledge either. So that's why it's so important to get this out there too, just so they understand that, you know, letting a student vape is not safe for them to do, because I genuinely think that's why a lot of them do. I've even heard from parents that they didn't know that there was nicotine in them. and that's definitely an issue. Any questions on any of this? I know I've talked a ton. I think that's all I have on here. Yes. Questions?
I will say that when we started our compliance checks, Detroit PD was not aware of how many businesses were selling to those who are underage. DART has hosted 3 different merchant trainings and has invited any business that sells vaping, tobacco, or alcohol products to those trainings so they know how to check for IDs and make sure they're not selling to those underage. And it took quite a few compliance checks with the city before we had one done where there wasn't any citations written. But hopefully we've made some progress on it.
Yeah, and I mean, that shows that it's working too. And another part that we do is we go around and give, updated signage that says, it's 21 and older. So we're going to be doing that throughout the month of March too. So you might be seeing more of those kind of signs around too, which is awesome. Because a lot of the vendors aren't even aware of the laws that are in place, which is clearly an issue. Because kids are getting a hold of these somehow, whether they're getting them from older siblings or friends, or they're just going to the store and getting them themselves. And I've heard a lot of students, they'll be honest with me when I'm in a counseling session, just because it is confidential, and they will tell me that they'll just go in and steal them. I learn a lot from them. One thing I will also say is, especially when I talk into schools, if a student is buying a vape from somebody else, not a store, that is extremely dangerous, because that can have anything in it, right? And that's one thing that we really talk a lot about, because that's how they're getting them, is from, some people get them on Instagram from random people or TikTok or whatever. And that's really dangerous too, because again, those can be laced with anything, and students aren't always trustworthy about what they're giving other students. So I've even had students say they buy melatonin vapes and cross off the melatonin, they'll scratch out the melatonin and sell it as a nicotine vape to get more money. So students are sometimes sneaky about it too. So again, I always hit home, if you're buying it from somebody else, people aren't always trustworthy. It's not safe to buy anything from another student. So that's something else we talk about. Anything else? Any other comments or anything you all have heard or noticed? All right. Well, we do have a bunch of information out on the table for both DART and PreventEd. We have some information on our guided program that's implemented. That's the counseling program I'm talking about. We can also take self-referrals. So if you were a parent of a student and maybe they aren't getting in trouble at school, but you're just kind of concerned and maybe they do need a little bit more education, I am more than happy to meet with them and provide a little bit more education and support. So we do have some brochures out there on that, and then just some other goodies and things like that. So thank you all again for coming. Thank you so much. Yeah.
Yeah, I just had one.
Yeah.
So there's the normal vape, like with the nicotine and stuff in it.
Mhm.
Do you guys ever touch on the vapes that have like the THC cartridges in it? Because they look just the same.
Yes.
I mean, they look a little different. I don't
Yeah.
know if you cover that at all.
Yes, so we teach about 4 different things in school. We teach alcohol, nicotine, cannabis, and prescription and over-the-counter drugs. That's another thing we talk about with cannabis, is that, again, if you're buying it from somebody else, it can easily have THC in it, and they might not know. I've had students tell me that they can tell a difference. So, for instance, if somebody's in the bathroom and they offer them a vape, they're like, yeah, I can tell the difference between a THC and nicotine one.
But I mean, as a parent, like, you may think it's a vape with just nicotine and like the flavor in it,
Right,
but it's not.
right.
It's got, and you don't know what level it is because you don't have the packaging. They're not
Mhm.
going to keep the packaging, of course.
And even if, let's say, it's a parent who's providing that vape to them, they can put whatever they want in there. So if they want to add THC to it, they can do that.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, with the DART Coalition, Do you want to talk a little bit about the device?
We tried to get funding for a device. The Troy PD brought to our attention that there is a device that could be purchased that is mobile, that we could use with the SROs or whoever. And you put the vape in and it will test exactly what is in that vape. Problem is, it costs between $13,000 and $15,000, and we could not get the funds approved through our grant to purchase that. So that is something that I would hope our community might get behind us and support in the future. Even if we just get one and we keep it here local and use it throughout the school districts, if it's housed at the police station and SROs come and get it, or if it's housed wherever, I do think it would be beneficial, because I do think that that's a lot of our issues that we have, because we don't know how to make referrals, and because in the past I've worked with teens with substance issues, and we don't know how to make the referrals. Is it a nicotine referral or is it a THC referral? And if we don't have that definitive, unless you take them to be tested, we don't know.
Yeah. And that's what a lot of schools will discipline differently for nicotine versus THC. And again, it's hard if you just get a vape just to know right off the bat. So something like that would be really helpful to actually be able to test what's in it. Yeah. Thank you. Any other comments or anything you're noticing?
I have a
Other
question
than
about
this is an
ordering
issue.
them online. I just
Yes.
asked, can you order it online? She's like, yeah. You
Oh
just-
yeah. Yeah.
Not
what-
that she did.
No, that's how so many students are getting a hold of them that way. I believe it was 2021, they came out with what's called a vape mail ban, and it was supposed to make it harder for them to order them online. Basically, it made it harder for companies to ship them out because they jacked up the rates on it really, so they made it really expensive for them to ship. I haven't looked at how effective that was. Clearly, it's still happening, so
So they could go to Amazon and
that's what I'm hearing. Yeah. Yes. Unfortunately.
The other thing is with the vapes, when they're inhaling that juice out of that vape, they're not really seeing how much they're using. Or if you have a pack, you can see how much you're actually taking out of that pack. They can go through a jewel pod and not even realize they've smoked enough
I mean, I
nicotine
see
to
kids and
equal a
they've got
pack and a
this-
half of cigarettes.
They suck it in and they've got this mound of cloud, and I'm just like, oh my gosh. I mean,
Yes.
it's just crazy.
And there's all these different, things that they'll tell me. And companies will make certain sweatshirts that is easy to hide the smoke and things like that. And I've even had students tell me, we'll talk about how Juul's not very common anymore. And they'll tell me, yeah, they are. They're common now because teachers can't smell them because they smell like mint or tobacco. They don't smell like the fruity flavors that people are looking out for. So again, they're smart, and I wish they would use it a different
They're
way.
little, they're thin. We
But-
can hide them above a door jamb and they're not being able to be seen.
Yeah. So the companies are not making it easy. Again, they're working to get more teenagers to start vaping. So it's going to take a lot to kind of fight against that. But the first thing we can do is just educate people. And that's what we try to do with educating students. And there's a ton of students who say, why do we get these presentations and people still vape? Like, why would anybody ever do that? And that makes me super happy that they say that because they're understanding. But then, of course, we talk about why they are doing it, because they want to fit in, they want to be cool. They don't think that it's harmful. And a study came out recently, because we talk a lot about how, students want to fit in, and that's why they're vaping. 66% of high schoolers who are vaping say that they want to quit. So typically they'll say, they do want to quit, but they're not saying that out loud in front of their friends. So if somebody wanted to fit in, maybe they would open up about wanting to quit, but that's not the cool thing to do. That's not the cool thing to talk about. But a lot of them do actually want to quit, which is a good thing, but...
And that's the main reason why we're educating the students. DART has hosted a teen summit a couple of times, and we bring the youth in and we talk about these dangers because they will listen to their friends and they will listen to their peers more than they will listen to an adult giving a presentation. So if we have a peer that's telling them, hey, this isn't good for you, they're more likely to listen to them. So that's just kind of one of the reasons why we seek to give the education to the students.
And I've actually worked with students who say that that's one of their biggest motivators is when their friends disapproved of it. They said that really keeps me from doing it is because when I was doing it, my friends were disappointed in me, which is awesome. Some of them have awesome friends, but great.
Let's give them a round of applause. Thank you.